is there a sort of a growing consciousness of the inability of NATO to produce munitions and really just NATO's capability in general?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a growing consciousness, but I think in general people really haven't fully grasped it. But things slip out. Like recently, Mark Rutte, the new Secretary General of NATO, actually said that that the Russians in 3 months produced what the Europeans, all of NATO, that's the U.S. and Europe, can produce in 12 months. So we're talking about a 4-to-1 ratio. I've heard it mistakenly said it's 3-to-1, it's 4-to-1 ratio. That's huge. And that's something that we've discussed, people on the, in the dissident media have discussed. And it's come out in some reports, like in the New York Times, I think there was one that suggested there was a 3-to-1 ratio, another a 7-to-1 ratio. So this 4-to-1 is probably quite accurate. And yeah, he said it. I don't think it probably didn't get nearly the play that it should have in Europe. I think there's still this, again, this smugness, this assumption of Western superiority that is not well founded.
Do you think there's any ability of NATO to sort of fix its problems? I mean, the amount of spending that NATO does and the US MIC is so high. Is there any way that you think that they are able to?
I don't think so. Like, just first look at spending. It's just that, again, the European economies are in trouble. And the thing is that Europe does not have the dollar, which allows America to kind of avoid the tough decisions. So, one day there will be a day of reckoning, where they can no longer do this. But now it's just like, if you're given a choice between guns and butter, the Americans will say, we'll do both, and we'll just print more dollars, right? The Europeans can't do that. Yeah, they actually, you hear them say that. They've said, well, we're going to have to tell our people, you're going to have to tighten your belts because we need to send more support to Ukraine. But people don't like to hear that. That's one of the main reasons for the rise of these, alternative parties. But let's say they do manage to increase spending. Let's to the 5%, for example, that Trump is asking them to do. I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to do that. It's quite unlikely that they actually can. Technically they could, but it's just politically unpalatable. But if they did, that doesn't solve the problem. This is a problem that I think a lot of politicians have. They don't really understand how, industry, what the technological realities, the physical constraints, they don't understand economics either. So they just think we just throw money at it and the problem's solved. No, the problem's not solved. If you just throw money at it, you're likely to get, you only have so many factories. You'll end up, throwing money at them doesn't solve the problem. If you just are just using that to maybe acquire more munitions, you just raise the price of them. Now, if you, clearly what you have to do is actually build new factories. In fact, you have to, but factories are part of a larger ecosystem. It's just that one factory is not a self-contained economy that can, if you're producing tanks or whatever, you have to also have, the steel mills and so on and so forth. And you have to have this whole ecology of different suppliers. That takes time to build up. It really does. It takes, I would say at least a generation to do. And then you have to have the skilled workers in those factories. And you don't just, put in call for workers and then somebody who's been out of work for, or maybe used to work in an Aldi, let's say, because I know that, in a supermarket or something, that he can just walk in and start, working on aircraft, for example. These are highly skilled. These jobs involve very advanced technical skills, and so you need people that are trained. So you have to have the educational infrastructure, and maybe apprenticeship programs and whatever that are directed to this new military industrial complex.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and especially in the this modern warfare. NATO needs to develop weapons for the 21st century. They don't have hypersonic missiles. They don't have good air defense or electronic warfare. They don't have good drone technology. It's like you pumping out, money to build tanks and, destroyers, aircraft carriers. This doesn't help. So we don't even have the technology itself. Or do we? Let me play you this clip from Trump, actually, and let me see what your take is on it real quick.
Okay.
How come they have hypersonics and Russia has hypersonics? We don't.
Because during Obama's administration, they stole the design for Russia stole the design. They got it from
us.
Some bad person gave them design. It was our jet. Now, I authorized the building of hypersonic, and we're doing super hypersonic, actually, which is even a step better. But and we'll have them starting fairly shortly. But Russia got them, and they built them, whereas they stole them during the Obama administration. Obama, not Biden, not anyone else. They probably stole plenty from Biden. We'll hear about that, too. But they stole the hypersonic stuff, and they made hypersonic missiles.
Is there any truth to that? That we had the designs for hypersonic missiles, and then Russia took them?
Right, yeah. I think on the face of that, that's a ridiculous claim. And the reason I say is that if indeed that happened, that we had the designs back in 2016?
Even earlier, I guess.
Yeah, even earlier, sometime. And then the Russians stole them. Well, the Russians developed hypersonic missiles in 2018. Here, it's 7 years later. We still haven't. So if we had them, why is it taking us 7 years longer? It already shows that the Russians are superior. That they even if they did, somehow they have the ability to implement it, put it into production, and we don't. But I don't believe that claim. Actually, it was something that Scott Ritter, who is, I think, very well informed on these subjects, being a former weapons inspector, said that what Trump is talking about is actually there was a fear that if you look at the Russian side of it, they began research into hypersonic missiles back in the Soviet era. I think it may have gone all the way back to the 1970s. So they had programs. They were looking at developing the concepts and so forth. So they already had a head start on that, and it was the Americans who tried to steal some of this. Now because especially during the 90s, there were a lot of these Russian institutes kind of opened up and began to collaborate with Westerners, and the Russians were afraid that some of these Westerners may have acquired top secret information, especially about their hypersonic program. And I think so at some point, there was a fear that some of the secrets, maybe it wasn't the 1990s, maybe more like 2010, when the Russians decided they needed to find out, what did the Americans, what information did they acquire? Did they actually get some top secret information they should not have gotten? And so they did look into, I guess through espionage, what the Americans were doing, how much of their own information they got. That's the explanation that Scott Ritter provides, and so I think that's what Trump is seizing on. Say, well, they spied on us, but I just think, again, on the surface, okay, even set aside Scott Ritter's story, even if the Russians did just steal it, it just shows the superiority on that side. That 2018 they already had them, and we're building them. Why hasn't America been able to do that?
Why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's a very good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, for me, it really shattered my perception of the U.S. military. I believe it was you who told me. I wasn't even aware of hypersonic missiles because it wasn't really much of a topic. I can understand why the West doesn't want to talk about it until really the war started breaking out. And then I started understanding about these missiles and then realized that China has them, Iran has them, maybe North Korea has them, but the U.S. doesn't have them. And this is really the game changer. Even Pete Hegseth, there's a clip of him talking about and every war game that we have with China, we lose. That in 15 minutes they could sink our whole navy with hypersonic missiles. That he straight up says that there's this acknowledgement, and so it's just clear to me that this is such an important technology in modern warfare. And if you as a military do not have this technology, then you're not really in contention for as a global military superpower, in my opinion. I know that's so crazy to say, but that's just kind of my opinion now, and just kind of what I've been seeing. Because like you can bomb the crap out of people and do these things with, but
but that's it.
Well, you can't do that to Russia, but even if you do that to Gaza,
Iran. Right.
Yeah, but I mean, even if we just pivoting over to Gaza a little bit, just think about how devastated that place is. That this is Israel, a nuclear power that is supposed to be like the strongest military in the Middle East, backed by the most powerful country in the world, the United States, that's bankrolling all of it with supposedly the most powerful military in the world. And then we saw what happened in Gaza with this hostage exchange. Hamas is standing proud. There cheers. There's people in southern Lebanon apparently coming down, waving Hamas flags. People in the West Bank. Hamas is now stronger than ever, I think you can say, in terms of just global support. And they are there. You see them there at the stage at the hostage release with their it's not destroyed at all. So here is basically a contained open air prison that is completely blockaded, and the most powerful military in the world, the U.S., and Israel, they lost. It's just, and then you say the same thing with the Houthis, pestering the U.S. military in the Red Sea. It just, to me, it's just so crazy that we don't have this technology, and there's this idea we have all this bluster going around that we want to start wars all over the place, and we need to look in the mirror and be like, hey, our heydays are over. That's it's not the 90s anymore.
Yeah. No, well, I think, in general, what you say is true. I would push back a little bit on Gaza, and the reason is I don't think like having hypersonic missiles or any of these new technologies wouldn't have made any difference there. The problem in Gaza is that first they were fighting not a conventional army, but these, you could say essentially like a guerrilla force that had a large underground network. And it was, I think probably the only way to really go after them was to go underground, and I think they were just too afraid to do that. So they just kept on bombing from above, killing civilians. So that's, slightly, it certainly does show a failure, and it shows the limits of military power in general. But it's not so much about the technological issues. But in the case of the Houthis, I think it is. It's just that the Houthis, have shown that with these missiles, they can do a great deal of damage, and we can't respond to it. We just, we've hit them hard over the course of many months now, and they're still standing, and they're still enforcing their blockade. My understanding is they lifted it partially because of the ceasefire. But they're still not allowing directly Israeli-linked shipping, through the Red Sea.
Trump said that we are doing something even better. We're developing super hypersonic. Is that even a thing?
Well, I heard that actually even from Scott Ritter. It's just like, okay, we decided to, instead of, just producing a simple, let's say, no bells and whistles kind of hypersonic missile, we decided to put on all the bells and whistles, which I think is typical, and it's probably stupid. So maybe we'll get something that's super duper in some sense, but it's going to be horrifically expensive, and probably will have all kinds of maintenance problems. And, it's just, again, it's going to be, maybe it'll work, maybe it'll be pretty good, but it'll come at tremendous cost. And, it's obviously taking a lot of time too. Again, it's just like the Russians, their philosophy really is just, I don't think it's quite fair to say quantity over quality, but to balance quantity and quality. They develop these new technologies, but they don't put all the bells and whistles on it. They make something that's quite effective, and then they produce a great number of them. And, and that's what wins wars. If you can only produce 12 missiles in a year, which was said to be the case for the SM-3, which is fired from ships. That's not going to win any wars for you, even if it's the world's greatest missile, which it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't believe that I was duped. The whole world was duped on just how powerful our U.S. military was.
I was surprised by how much of a paper tiger NATO turned out to be. And and I thought that, again, that the West would overwhelm Russia, because, again, if you look at the purchasing power parity, which shows Russia as number 4 in the world, they leapfrogged both Germany and Japan after the SMO began. So all this talk about, their economy in tatters, it's nonsense. But even if you look at the purchasing power parities, like when you combine all the Western European economies with the U.S., it's much, their total economic output should be much, much larger than that of Russia. But somehow they can't produce the things they need in this war. It's really quite astounding.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that they can't, though, to be honest. I almost feel this is bad that, I don't want the U.S. to get hypersonic missiles. I know we will eventually, just because of how aggressive the U.S. has been. And I just don't, I'm afraid if we were able to turn on the war machine and all of a sudden start to crank out these missiles and crank out the artillery shells and then really start to push Russia back and beyond, then we could be looking at a real dangerous conflict. We could be looking at, if we really try to break up Russia,
right,
that's when nukes start flying. So it's just
exactly. If it really becomes existential for Russia, then we're in trouble. So, thank God that these people like Kaja Kallas and other European leaders who have talked about breaking up Russia, of actually, marching on Moscow. Thank God that their dreams will not come true, because their dream would quickly turn into a nightmare. That's when Europe actually, its own existence will be put at risk if these people actually had their way. Thank goodness that the Russians do have the upper hand. They can pursue this war to a certain point and then stop, and it'll be over. That's what we hope. Yeah, that's what we hope. And I think because of the realities that we've talked about, that's what will happen, because NATO really can't counteract, really will not be able to prevent Russia from achieving its objectives.
Just the irony of it, though, that the world might be saved because NATO is a paper tiger. Thank goodness that NATO is actually so weak, because if it wasn't and they got their wish, we could be looking at a real nuclear end of the world Armageddon superpower clash.
Right. Things have changed. NATO once served a purpose. And it was, I think, fair to say it was truly a defensive organization. But it underwent a transformation after the fall of the Soviet Union, and it started to become into something more than a defensive organization. And we saw that in Serbia, we saw that in Libya, and that we're seeing this. Even though NATO is not directly officially involved, we are seeing it in fact in Ukraine. It has become an interventionist and, in some cases, offensive military alliance. Mm-hmm. And so, thank God. Over that same period of time, as it began to produce, to pursue these more aggressive policies, it was also becoming progressively weaker.